We lived in Pine Harbor, a small town on the coast of Maine where fishermen know the names of seagulls and the pharmacist knows all our ailments. I'm Sarah Miller. I worked at the school, library, books, quiet children. My husband Danny, an electrician and contractor, fixing boat winches, drying racks for cod, lamps on porches. Winters were long and summers were short, like the flashes of the lighthouse. We had lived together for 11 years and thought we knew each other better than the shores know their tides. One evening in October, I was washing Danny's jacket, the blue one with the knee patches. In the inside pocket, something heavy and round rustled. I shook out a bunch of keys onto the table. On the ring, a brass tag with the letters R7. I glanced at him. He was hammering nails into the drawer lid and humming. "Yours?" I asked. Danny looked up, smiled slightly, and shrugged. "Not mine. Probably a client's." I placed the keys in the trinket dish and told myself, don't ask stupid questions. But at night they clanged in my ears like spoons in the dryer. The tag had small scratches as if it had been spun around someone's fingers. R7, room number, a lodge. Danny had been disappearing at night. The generator at the dock's out again. Wells asked me to check the panel. In his toolbox, I found a gas receipt at 2:17 a.m. I didn't want to be the one snooping, but I already was. On Friday after work, I went to the Harbor Rest Inn, an old guest house on the hill above the harbor. The oak stairs creaked, and the hallway smelled like polish and cinnamon. At the counter sat Mrs. Clark, dry as a bundle of dried cod. I placed the tag on the counter. R7, is it yours? She brought her glasses close to the tag and nodded. Room 7, on the roof. Old attic room. We don't rent it out regularly, only to those who like silence. I pretended I was looking for a room for a niece. She smiled, with her lips, not her eyes. Does your niece also need silence? Room on the roof, the attic, silence. I knew one person who hated silence, my husband, but R7 was in his pocket. On Saturday morning, I told Danny I was going to visit my sister in Camden. In reality, I went up the hill to the Harbor Rest Inn and asked to see room 7. Mrs. Clark took a long time finding the key, like she was preparing me for something. The stairs to the attic were narrow. The window faced straight to the lighthouse. The room, a small table, a bed, an old fan, and a Smith Corona typewriter, carefully covered with a towel. Beside it was a box of paper. I lifted the towel. On the typewriter lay a sheet with a few lines. The light at the entrance flickers like a pike. When it blinks, you can't see the water, only its intent. I wrote you a letter, but the sea took the draft. The words were typed unevenly, between the lines, bits of eraser. I placed my fingers on the keys. They were warm. Someone had just placed their hands on them. "Who stays here?" I asked. "Mr. Reed," Mrs. Clark said. "He arrives at night, writes articles about trawl accessories or tar candles. I get confused. He's quiet like a firefly." "Mr. Reed, R on the tag. R7, report." My stomach tightened. Danny had never liked typewriters. He was afraid of them as people are afraid of hospitals. I returned home, waiting for him on the porch, clutching the tag in my pocket like a prayer bead. When he arrived, I showed him the tag again. "Where's this from?" I asked. I told you, not mine." "R7, the room on the roof. There's a typewriter. Someone's writing about our harbor. Someone with your key in my washing machine." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I should have told you earlier, when I was younger." He took off his jacket and sat on the stairs. "I'm not just an electrician. I also write about people from our dock, under a pseudonym. I've been sending columns to Coastline Weekly as Reed, R, from Reed Street, where I grew up. I didn't want anyone to find out, especially you." I laughed dryly. "Why secretly? Why the hotel? Why R7? He replied softly, "Because at home I hear you, the washing machine, the kettle, and I'm afraid I'll write about my own kitchen instead of our town. Because in the attic I can hear the sea breathe. Because the columns came out, and they sent me letters. They praised me, and I didn't know how to live with praise beside you who had to wash my boots after the dock. I wanted to say I wasn't his enemy for his praise, but the words got stuck. I didn't know who was at fault now and who was hurt. At night, he slept on the other side of the bed. I listened to the lighthouse through the open window. It flashed rhythmically, as if counting our breaths. The next day, I got the back issues of Coastline Weekly from the library. I was looking for Reed's column. I found it. Letters from the top room. Short pieces about the harbor, with such attention to detail that I read slowly, afraid I'd miss something. Seagulls argue for fish like we argue for praise. The real fish falls below. People confuse noise with honesty. The sea doesn't make noise. The sea warns. I knew this rhythm. That's how Danny spoke to me when we first went to the dock to watch the moon in the icy water. At the end of each column was a note. The editorial receives letters from Pine Harbor from an author under a pseudonym. The theme, the lives of those who aren't interviewed. I went to the newspaper's office in the big city an hour's drive away. The editor, a woman with dark eyes named Julia, said, "If you're Sarah, Danny asked not to reveal his identity yet. We respect anonymity, but the columns are important. Fishermen write to us, saying they finally felt heard." "Is he a good writer?" I asked. "He writes honestly," she said. At home, I found a note on the table. "I'm meeting with Rick Wells. He knows about the old accidents at the pier. I'll be late. Diem." Rick Wells, a guy who always had an opinion about everything and a bottle for anyone. I went to the pier. Rick wasn't there because he'd been gone a year already. He drowned at the end of last winter. I only met Harry with ice cream and a girl named Emmy who was learning to dance on the planks. "Rick?" "No, Mrs. Sarah," she said. "But Reed came by. He has a notebook. He always carries it with him." "Reed, and that's Danny. He came here not as an electrician, but as a listener. I tried to love the stranger in me who didn't know her husband." A week later, a story appeared in the Letters from the Top Room column about a woman who never went up to the roof of her house because she was afraid of seeing the town differently. I read it, and my cheeks burned. It was me, subtly changed, slightly invented, but recognizable. I waited for him on the porch. "You had no right," I said. "I'm not a character." He stood, holding 2 bags from the store, looking guilty like a schoolboy. "I changed the details," he tried. "Doesn't this concern you?" I asked. "It concerns both of us," he replied. "I wanted to tear up that issue and throw it into the sea, but I left it on the table like a problem that doesn't like the dark. We went up to R7 together. Mrs. Clark looked at us like we were people who decided to tell the truth in the wrong place. Danny sat at the typewriter like a musician at the piano. "Write about yourself so I don't hurt," I said. He nodded, put his fingers on the keys, but at first didn't type anything. Then he typed, "I held the sea as an excuse not to hold your hand. I held silence as an excuse. I was a traitor only in one way. I betrayed our chance to be honest." I read it, and for the first time in weeks I felt that there was air in the room. "More?" I said. "Write why you need praise." He smiled crookedly. "So someone else will tell me I exist? When you say it, I believe it. When strangers say it, I get used to it." I suddenly didn't feel sorry for him, but for us. We had a life where praise was a luxury and silence was furniture. The next morning, a letter came without a return address. "Mr. Reed, if you write the truth, then write about this. My brother disappeared after the night shift at the lighthouse in 1973. Everyone says he fell. But I know the door wasn't closed properly. They locked him in the dark when the lamp burned out. No one was punished." The letter was signed Linda Fox. I knew Linda. She worked at the bakery. I'd bring her buns to school every Tuesday. She never talked about her brother. Danny unfolded the map, found old records about key copying in 1973. R7 suddenly became not just a room, but a door to stories people had been hiding for decades. "Is this dangerous?" I asked. "Writing is always dangerous if the truth involves the living," he said. "What if it involves the dead? Then it gives the living back their voice." The column about the open lighthouse doors came out a week later. At the bait tackle store, they argued more about the lamps than the bait. The old lighthouse keeper, Mr. Svensson, came to our porch in a dark coat. "Mr. Reed?" he asked into the air. "Yes," I said, "but he's also my husband." Svensson sat on the step. "I haven't spoken in 20 years, he said. "That night I was at home with a fever. My nephew covered for me. He didn't know the lock was sticking if the humidity was high. I was silent because of shame. If Mr. Reed writes a continuation, let him write about how silence is sometimes a crime too." Danny listened and wrote it down. I made tea, and the tea wasn't enough for everyone, but it seemed to be enough for each one. In the evening, I sat at the R7 typewriter by myself. I didn't know how to type without looking. My fingers searched for letters like light searches for the shore. I wrote, "I'm Sarah." I thought betrayal was other people's hands, but it turned out it's other people's words, written at night. I was jealous not of a woman, but of praise. Now I ask no less to be a reader in my home, a reader who is asked if it hurts. The page came out crooked, the lines slanted, but I left it by the typewriter like a note on water. Danny read it. "Can this be in the column?" he asked cautiously. "It can if it's about us, not about the reader," I said. He nodded. "This time, about us." In spring, the lighthouse light seemed calmer, probably because we stopped confusing blinks with lies. Linda Fox brought a pie and said she hadn't seen closed doors in her dreams for years. The port laughed over new trawlers, not over people who write. Mrs. Clark let us leave R7 for free for a few evenings. "For the shared letters," she said, "I think it's a useful thing. We began to go up there not for secrets, but for conversations. Sometimes we stayed silent and listened to the ticking of the fan and the sea breathing from the outside of the window. I didn't forgive Danny right away, but I learned not to confuse silence with love and words with betrayal. Danny learned to bring me rough drafts and to handle my edits. Once he said, "The lighthouse blinks so the living know where not to sail. Writing does too." I smiled. "And marriage does too." Afterward, a year later, Coastline Weekly published a small collection, Letters from the Top Room. On the cover, a photo of our lighthouse taken from R7, where the glass is slightly scratched and the light seems to be smiling. We came to the presentation in Camden. Editor Julia read excerpts and then said, "The author is under a pseudonym, but today he allowed us to say his name. Danny Miller, the one who listens." People applauded for a long time, not loudly, as people applaud those they see every day and suddenly truly notice. After, we returned to Pine Harbor. On the kitchen table, I placed the keys with the R7 tag and said, "Let them lie here. Let them know our door is open." The lighthouse blinked as always, and that as always suddenly became the best news of the year.